July 11th, 1944, 4 kilometers southeast of Caen. The turret turned in silence. 70 tons of steel, angled armour plate, and a single 8.8 centimetre gun traversing toward a column of British armour advancing through summer wheat. Inside, 5 men who had survived Kursk, Kharkov, and the long retreat across Ukraine now faced their first engagement against the West. They had been issued this tank 3 weeks earlier at a depot outside Stuttgart. The manual was still being written. By noon, 12 Sherman tanks had been destroyed. 2 more were captured intact, their crews abandoning them after watching the others burn. The Tiger II withdrew without loss. Its commander reported the action in 4 sentences. He did not mention that the final drive had begun grinding during the return journey, or that the engine temperature had exceeded operational limits, or that they had consumed 190 litres of fuel to travel 17 kilometres. This was the debut of Germany's final answer to the question no one had thought to ask. What happens when you build the perfect tank in a war you are already losing? The Tiger II emerged not from strategic necessity, but from doctrinal inertia. In 1942, when German engineers at Henschel began designing a successor to the Tiger I, the Wehrmacht still held Stalingrad, and the panzers were racing toward the Caucasus oil fields. By the time the first production model rolled off the assembly line in January 1944, the Red Army had advanced 600 kilometers westward, and Allied bombers were systematically erasing Germany's industrial capacity from the sky. The tank they produced weighed 69.8 tons, the heaviest operational armoured vehicle of the war, powered by the same 700 horsepower Maybach HL 230 engine that struggled to move the 12-ton lighter Tiger I. It should not have worked. The power-to-weight ratio was catastrophic, 10 horsepower per ton, insufficient for a vehicle designed to operate across the shattered infrastructure of a collapsing Reich. The suspension used overlapping road wheels that froze solid in wet conditions and packed with mud on the Eastern Front. The final drive, transmission and steering mechanism had not been redesigned to handle the additional weight. Bridge crossings required specialized engineer units to reinforce spans that were never intended to support 70 tons of moving steel. Maximum road speed was 41.5 kilometers per hour under ideal conditions. Cross-country, it struggled to maintain 15. But the gun. The 8.8 centimeter KWK 43L71 could penetrate 165 millimeters of armor at 2,000 meters, more than enough to destroy any Allied tank from distances where return fire was ineffective. The frontal armor measured 180 millimeters, sloped at angles that made it functionally impenetrable to everything except massed artillery fire or aerial bombardment. When it worked, when fuel was available, when the crew had been trained properly and the final drive had not yet failed, the Tiger II was the most lethal ground combat vehicle in existence. The Germans ordered 1/500 of them. They built 492. Each Tiger II cost 321,500 Reichsmark to produce. For that price, Germany could have built 5 Panzer IVs or 3 Panthers. The assembly process at Henschel's Kassel plant required 300,000 man-hours per vehicle. Every Tiger II represented resources extracted from a military-industrial complex that was being systematically destroyed faster than it could rebuild. Between April and September 1944, Allied bombing reduced German petroleum production by 95%. In April, synthetic fuel plants produced 316,000 tons. By September, production had collapsed to 17,000 tons. Aviation gasoline dropped from 175,000 tons to 5,000 tons, a 97% reduction. For 2 weeks in September, all refined fuel production in Germany ceased entirely. The Tiger II consumed 500 litres per 100 kilometres under combat conditions. Its operational range was 170 kilometres on roads, 120 cross-country. With an 860-litre fuel tank, each vehicle required constant resupply in a transportation network that was collapsing under its own weight. Fuel trucks had to accompany every Tiger II deployment, and those trucks required fuel, and the depots supplying the trucks were being bombed by aircraft that Germany no longer had the aviation fuel to intercept. Production proceeded anyway. 1 vehicle in 1943, 379 in 1944, 112 in early 1945 before Soviet forces overran the factory. Between September 22 and October 7, 1944, 5 separate Allied bombing raids on Kassel destroyed 95% of the Henschel plant's floor space. Post-war analysis estimated this prevented the construction of an additional 657 Tiger IIs. The raids killed 157 workers and displaced 4,000 others. Production resumed 11 days later at 60% capacity. The next tank completed on October 23 had been partially assembled before the bombing. No one issued orders to stop production. The Tiger II represented German armour doctrine distilled to its purest form: overwhelming firepower, impenetrable protection, tactical invincibility. That it could no longer be fuelled, maintained, or deployed effectively did not alter the fundamental belief that superior engineering would prevail. The gap between what the tank could do and what the German military could support it doing widened with each vehicle delivered. July 18, 1944, 05:25 hours, Cagny, Calvados. Operation Goodwood opened with 8,000 tons of bombs dropped across 15 square kilometres. The bombardment lasted 2 hours. British planners had identified every German strongpoint within the planned axis of advance and assigned each one to specific bomber groups with coordinates accurate to within 50 metres. The objective was to saturate German defensive positions so thoroughly that the subsequent armoured thrust by 3 British armoured divisions would achieve breakout. The 3rd Company, 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, was positioned directly in the impact zone. They had 9 Tiger IIs. Post-strike reconnaissance found 1 tank flipped completely upside down by blast overpressure. 56 tons of armour inverted like a child's toy. 3 more had thrown tracks. 2 were buried under collapsed buildings. 1 had taken a direct hit from a 500-pound bomb that penetrated the engine deck and detonated inside, liquefying the crew. By 0600 hours, 1 Tiger II from 3rd Company remained operational. The crew, suffering from concussion and bleeding from their ears, reported ready for action. At 0610, 1,100 British tanks began advancing through gaps in the minefield. However, the bombing had missed the ridge. Bourguebus Ridge, the critical high ground dominating the entire operational area, had been struck with lighter ordnance to avoid cratering the approaches. German observation posts there survived intact, along with elements of the 1st SS Panzer Corps and 6 Tiger IIs from the 503rd Battalion's 2nd Company. What followed was not a battle, but an equation. British armour advanced in columns, constrained by the cleared gaps in the minefield. German tanks on the ridge could observe the entire British axis of advance and engage at maximum range. The British had numbers. 3 armoured divisions represented more firepower than Germany had deployed during the invasion of Poland. The Germans had geometry. The 2nd Company's Tiger IIs opened fire at ranges exceeding 2,000 metres. British commanders reported tanks exploding before they could identify the source of fire. Return fire proved ineffective. 75mm Sherman rounds could not penetrate Tiger II frontal armour even at close range, and close range meant exposing yourself to that 8.8 centimetre gun. The British advance, which had been scheduled to reach Falaise by nightfall, stopped at Bourguebus Ridge. By evening, Operation Goodwood had become Operation Goodenough. British forces held their gains, but the breakout had failed. Of the 6 Tiger IIs from 2nd Company that had engaged, 5 remained operational. They had fired 340 rounds and destroyed an estimated 47 British tanks. The 6th Tiger II had been rammed by a Sherman from the Irish Guards after its transmission failed, immobilizing it. The crew surrendered. The Germans reported the action as a defensive victory. British after-action reports noted that 6 tanks had delayed 3 divisions. No one mentioned that the Tigers, which had saved Bourguebus Ridge, could not be moved to another sector because there was insufficient fuel to relocate them, or that replacement parts for the damaged transmission would not arrive for 3 weeks, or that by then the entire Normandy front would have collapsed. In a 166-day period during late 1944, the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion deployed 45 Tiger IIs and destroyed 365 Allied armoured vehicles while losing 25 of their own. The kill ratio 14.6 to 1. Across all units, the 492 Tiger IIs produced during the war are credited with several thousand confirmed kills. These figures represent tactical excellence. They do not represent strategic relevance. Post-war analysis of German heavy tank battalions revealed that more Tiger IIs were abandoned due to mechanical failure or lack of fuel than were destroyed by enemy action. Operational readiness rates averaged 40%. On a good day, 4 of every 10 Tiger IIs were combat capable. The remaining 6 were awaiting parts that were not being manufactured, or fuel that was not being refined, or recovery vehicles that lacked the capacity to tow 70 tons across destroyed infrastructure. The Allies built tanks differently. The United States produced 49 Thaunus 234 Sherman tanks during the war. When a Sherman was destroyed, another replaced it within days. Crews were trained on standardized systems that remained consistent across production runs. Parts were interchangeable. Fuel was abundant. The Sherman was inferior to the Tiger II in every measurable combat metric: armor, firepower, crew survivability. It did not matter. You could not kill them faster than they could be replaced. The Tiger II represented the opposite philosophy: build something so superior that quantity becomes irrelevant. This worked at the tactical level, in individual engagements where crew skill and vehicle capability could determine outcomes. It failed completely at the strategic level, where wars are decided by logistics, industrial capacity, and the ability to sustain operations over time. Germany understood this. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments and War Production, reported to Hitler in December 1944 that the fuel situation was catastrophic. The Ardennes offensive, Germany's final major attack in the West, was planned around capturing Allied fuel depots because German reserves were insufficient to sustain the operation. The offensive failed. Germany's remaining fuel reserves were consumed in a 2-week battle that accomplished nothing except hastening the collapse. Tiger II units participated in the Ardennes offensive. They operated in forested terrain completely unsuited to their design. The long-barreled gun could not traverse properly, the weight made them road-bound, the limited maneuverability made them vulnerable to flanking attacks. Crews reported that operating the Tiger II in the Ardennes was worse than facing Soviet tank armies in open steppe. At least in Russia, you could maneuver. August 12, 1944. Eastern Front. The Vistula River. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion engaged Soviet forces across the Vistula bridgehead near Baranov-Sandomiersky. They had been equipped with Tiger IIs for exactly 12 days. The deployment had consumed their entire fuel allocation for the month. The Red Army was crossing the Vistula in strength. Soviet doctrine did not emphasize individual tank superiority. It emphasized mass, speed, and overwhelming firepower concentrated at breakthrough points. When a Tiger II destroyed a T-34, 3 more appeared behind it. When those were destroyed, 6 more arrived. The Soviets had tank production capacity that exceeded German output by factors of 10. The 501st held the bridgehead for 4 days. They destroyed 127 Soviet armored vehicles. Then they ran out of ammunition. Resupply trucks could not reach them because the roads were under Soviet artillery fire. They withdrew, leaving behind 3 Tiger IIs that had suffered mechanical failures during the engagement. Engineers rigged demolition charges, but Soviet forces overran the position before detonation could be completed. The Soviets recovered 2 intact Tiger IIs and shipped them to Moscow for technical evaluation. This pattern repeated across the Eastern Front through autumn 1944. Tiger II units would be deployed to critical sectors, achieve devastating tactical results, then be forced to withdraw due to fuel shortages, mechanical failures, or encirclement by Soviet forces that simply moved around them. The German High Command used Tiger II battalions as fire brigades, rushing them to threatened sectors to plug gaps in collapsing defensive lines. It was not a sustainable strategy. Fire brigades require functioning roads, available fuel, and problems that can be solved by localized intervention. By late 1944, the Eastern Front was collapsing along its entire length. There were no localized problems, only systemic failure. March 6, 1945, Szeregelyes, Hungary. 2 Tiger IIs from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion engaged 6 Soviet JS-2 heavy tanks at 2,000 meters. The JS-2 had been designed specifically to counter the Tiger, 192mm gun, 160mm frontal armor, 46-ton weight that made it significantly more mobile than German heavy tanks. It was the closest thing to a Tiger II equivalent the Soviets fielded. The engagement lasted 17 minutes. All 6 JS-2s were destroyed. Both Tiger IIs survived, though one suffered damage to its gun mantlet from a 122mm round that struck at an angle and deflected. It changed nothing. Soviet forces bypassed the position and continued their advance toward Vienna. The 2 Tiger IIs, having exhausted their ammunition and lacking fuel for withdrawal, were scuttled by their crews. Both tanks had been operational for less than 6 weeks. April 19, 1945, Bollersdorf, Germany. 4 Tiger IIs from an unidentified unit engaged 120 Soviet tanks, a mixture of T-34-85s and JS-2s, at ranges between 1,500 and 3,000 meters. The battle lasted several hours, continuing after dark. 30 Soviet tanks were confirmed destroyed. The Germans lost no vehicles. All 4 Tiger II commanders received the Knight's Cross on April 28. 9 days later, Germany surrendered. Of the 492 Tiger IIs produced, approximately 80 served on the Western Front. The remainder fought on the Eastern Front, primarily in Hungary, during the final months of the war. The 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, the most successful Tiger II unit, claimed 1,700 enemy vehicles destroyed. Post-war analysts dispute this figure, noting that German kill claims throughout the war significantly exceeded verified losses. What remains undisputed is that the 503rd lost 252 tanks, more than half the entire production run. The final Tiger II was completed in March 1945. It was assigned to a unit that no longer existed, delivered to a depot that was under Soviet artillery fire, and abandoned before it fired a single shot. Soviet forces found it 3 days later, fully fueled but immobilized because the crew had not been trained to operate it. The Tiger II embodied a peculiar German pathology, the belief that technical superiority could substitute for strategic viability. The tank worked. The armor was nearly impenetrable. The gun could destroy anything it could see. Crew training, when time permitted, produced remarkably effective results. None of this addressed the fundamental problem that Germany was fighting a war of attrition against enemies with functionally unlimited industrial capacity, while its own production infrastructure was being systematically annihilated. Every hour spent building a Tiger II represented resources not spent building trucks, or repairing railways, or manufacturing spare parts for existing equipment. Every litre of fuel consumed by a 70-ton tank was a litre unavailable for transport vehicles, supply trucks, or reconnaissance elements. Every crew assigned to operate a Tiger II was a crew unavailable for simpler, more reliable vehicles that could be deployed in useful numbers. The Germans understood this. Speer's reports to Hitler throughout 1944 emphasized that production priorities were fundamentally misaligned with strategic requirements. Field commanders submitted recommendations to halt Tiger II production and redirect resources towards simpler designs. These recommendations were ignored. The Tiger II represented German armor doctrine in its purest form, and abandoning it would have required acknowledging that the doctrine itself was obsolete. American forces discovered the final operational Tiger II in Bavaria on May 3, 1945. It had been abandoned by its crew after the engine overheated during a retreat. The fuel tanks were empty. The gun had 14 rounds remaining. An inspection team from the U.S. Army's Ordnance Department examined it over the following week, documenting every system in exhaustive detail. Their report noted the exceptional armor protection, the devastating firepower, and the sophisticated fire control systems. It also noted the catastrophically inadequate engine, the fragile transmission, the overcomplicated suspension, and the impossible logistical requirements. The conclusions stated that the Tiger II represented the most capable tank design encountered during the war and a complete failure of strategic planning. The vehicle was shipped to the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for further testing. It was fired upon with various American and British weapons to assess armour effectiveness. The frontal armour proved impenetrable to everything except repeated strikes from 90mm anti-aircraft guns at close range. The side armour was vulnerable to standard anti-tank weapons. Testers concluded that the Tiger II could only be reliably destroyed from the front by massed artillery fire or aerial attack, the same methods that had proven effective in Normandy. No American tank could penetrate Tiger II frontal armour in a direct engagement. This did not concern American planners. They had never encountered a Tiger II in circumstances where it mattered. By the time Tiger IIs appeared in significant numbers, the outcome of the war had already been determined by factors that had nothing to do with individual tank capability, industrial production, fuel supplies, air superiority, and the simple arithmetic of replacement rates. The Tiger II was not defeated by better tanks. It was defeated by logistics, industrial capacity, and a strategic situation that made its very existence counterproductive. Every Tiger II represented a choice: build one perfect tank or build 5 adequate ones. Germany chose perfection repeatedly, long after the war had become a contest of quantity. The irony is that German engineers succeeded completely. They built exactly what they set out to build: an armoured vehicle superior to anything the Allies could field, immune to conventional anti-tank weapons, capable of destroying enemy armour at ranges where return fire was ineffective. It worked. Every technical specification was met or exceeded. The armour was impenetrable. The gun was devastating. The fire control was sophisticated. The design was brilliant. It changed nothing. Wars are not won by building the best weapons. They are won by building enough weapons, delivering them to the battlefield, keeping them supplied, and replacing them when they are destroyed. The Tiger II could do none of these things adequately. It required fuel Germany could not provide, spare parts that were not being manufactured, and infrastructure that had been bombed into rubble. Each Tiger II that reached the front represented a logistical miracle. Each one that remained operational for more than a week represented an exception. The 492 Tiger IIs Germany built destroyed thousands of Allied vehicles and killed tens of thousands of Allied soldiers. They represent some of the most remarkable tactical achievements of the war, individual engagements where crew skill and vehicle capability achieved results that seemed impossible. They also represent a fundamental strategic failure: the inability to recognize that tactical excellence cannot compensate for systemic collapse. The Tiger II was Germany's last Mirage, a vision of invincibility projected across a landscape of defeat. It appeared suddenly, destroyed everything it engaged, then disappeared, consumed by the same logistical and industrial failures that were destroying the Reich itself. The crews believed in it. The engineers who built it believed in it. The commanders who deployed it believed that superior technology would prevail. They were correct about the technology. The Tiger II was superior. But superiority means nothing when you cannot fuel it, cannot repair it, and cannot build enough of them to matter. By 1944, Germany needed trucks more than it needed tanks, fuel more than it needed firepower, and production capacity more than it needed perfection. The Tiger II represented the opposite of every lesson the war had taught. They built it anyway. May the 8th, 1945, Germany surrenders. Soviet forces catalogued 204 destroyed or abandoned Tiger IIs on the Eastern Front. American and British forces accounted for another 147 in the West. The remainder, 141 vehicles, were never documented. They disappeared into the chaos of Germany's final collapse, abandoned by crews who lacked fuel to move them or orders to defend positions that no longer existed. Some were scuttled. Others were simply left where they stopped, out of fuel and out of war. Soviet recovery teams spent months collecting abandoned German armor for technical evaluation. They found Tiger IIs on railways, on roads, in fields, buried in barns. Some had never been fired in combat, some had been destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. All of them told the same story: exceptional capability, impossible logistics, strategic irrelevance. The Tiger II survived the war as a museum piece, a demonstration of what perfect engineering looks like when divorced from strategic reality. Visitors marvel at the armor thickness, the gun's size, the brutal elegance of the design. They photograph the sloped plates, the massive turret, the overlapping road wheels. What they cannot see is the fuel it consumed, the bridges it destroyed, the spare parts it required, the resources it diverted from equipment that might have mattered. Germany built the perfect tank at precisely the moment when perfection became a liability. They succeeded completely. It broke them anyway. The steel that broke itself. 70 tons of inevitability, engineered to win battles in a war that was already lost.